The passage of time has a peculiar way of shifting our perspective on history, transforming monumental milestones into complex spectacles, where the line between profound celebration and sheer absurdity becomes entirely blurred. When an entire nation prepares for centuries to mark a truly historic moment, the weight of expectation settles heavily upon every parade, every monument, and every public gathering designed to honor the legacy of the past. For generations, the anticipation building toward the major historical anniversaries of the modern world has promised unparalleled grandeur, a chance for citizens and onlookers from across the globe to witness a definitive display of cultural identity, unity, and shared heritage. In the heart of the capital, where the stone monuments stand as silent sentinels to centuries of governance and societal transformation, the stage was meticulously set for a summer that would be remembered for decades to come. Though perhaps not for the reasons the original planners had envisioned. As the summer heat began to radiate off the massive marble structures and the wide, sweeping avenues of Washington, a series of unprecedented events began to unfold, shifting the public consciousness from reverent reflection to deep curiosity and growing skepticism. Observers watching from afar could sense that something unusual was happening in the corridors of power and along the vast green expanses of the National Mall. As the traditional solemnity of historical commemoration began to give way to a bizarrely eclectic series of spectacles that seemed to challenge the very definition of a national jubilee. To truly understand how a moment of profound global significance transformed into one of the most talked about, debated, and surreal chapters in recent cultural history, one must look closely at the early signs of friction that emerged long before the first crowds even gathered on the grand lawns of the capital city. Before we dive deeper into the strange realities and unexpected twists of this massive summer celebration, take a quick moment to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an investigative report into the events shaping our world today. The grand designs of committee organizers often look magnificent on paper, promising a seamless blend of historical reverence, high-profile entertainment, and massive public participation that reflects the ultimate ideals of a society. Yet the reality of executing such an enormous undertaking frequently reveals deep fractures in the narrative. In the months leading up to the great occasion, rumors began to circulate through the media about the extraordinary nature of the planned festivities, hinting at a schedule of events that would depart radically from the typical parades and speeches of yesteryear, leaving many to wonder what the true atmosphere of the capital would become once the gates finally opened. From the sprawling lawns surrounding the executive mansions to the carefully manicured historic plazas, the entire city was slowly transformed into a massive living stage where the ordinary rules of public celebration seemed to be entirely rewritten in favor of something far more commercial, chaotic, and unpredictable than anyone could have anticipated. This was not merely a day of local fireworks and backyard gatherings, but a multi-week phenomenon designed to project an image of absolute strength and cultural dominance to the rest of the world, making the subsequent logistical collapses and bizarre creative choices all the more fascinating to analyze from an objective distance. As the early days of July approached, the physical transformation of the historical landscape became impossible to ignore, with massive steel stages rising up against the backdrop of iconic neoclassical architecture, and temporary security perimeters rerouting the daily lives of residents and tourists alike who had come to witness history but found themselves caught in a surreal carnival atmosphere instead. The initial whispers of discontent began when the highly anticipated musical lineups and cultural exhibitions started to shift unexpectedly behind the scenes. signaling that the grand illusion of a flawless national festival was beginning to crack under the pressure of intense public scrutiny and organizational mismanagement. Every detail of the unfolding spectacle seemed designed to provoke a reaction. From the choice of commercial vendors lining the historic walkways to the highly unusual athletic spectacles slated to take place on grounds that had previously been reserved for formal state dinners and historic diplomatic summits. As the sun rose over the Potomac River on the morning of the great celebration, the tension in the air was palpable, with independent observers, media crews, and curious digital creators arriving in droves to document a phenomenon that felt less like a traditional historical tribute and more like a fever dream of modern pop culture and commercial excess wrapped in a national flag. The true nature of what was occurring within these high-security zones remained hidden from the general public, obscured by glossy promotional materials and official press releases that painted a picture of absolute success, forcing those on the ground to look beneath the surface to discover what happens when a historic milestone is handed over to the forces of modern entertainment. It is within this atmospheric landscape of grand ambition and creeping logistical chaos that our story truly begins, setting the stage for an investigative journey through a series of events that would leave millions of viewers online questioning the reality of what took place in the capital of the free world. As the gates of the capital city swung open to welcome the massive influx of summer visitors, the sheer scale of the logistical anomalies began to take center stage, transforming the historic core of Washington into a bizarre battleground between corporate sponsorship and national heritage. The true absurdity of the Grand Jubilee manifested itself most clearly when the pristine historic lawns of the Executive Mansion were abruptly retrofitted to accommodate a professional mixed martial arts cage. An unprecedented decision that left historians and casual observers alike utterly speechless. For the first time in the long history of the country, the South Lawn of the White House, typically reserved for the reception of foreign heads of state, rigorous diplomatic ceremonies, and quiet moments of executive reflection, became an arena for a sanctioned ultimate fighting championship event. Spectators watched in a mixture of disbelief and morbid fascination as grown men clashed in brutal combat, sweating and bleeding onto the very grounds that had witnessed centuries of monumental governance, creating a visual contrast so jarring that it immediately ignited a firestorm of debate across the digital landscape. This physical display of raw aggression, presented under the banner of supreme national celebration, served as the ultimate prelude to a series of organizational collapses that would plague the entire holiday weekend, proving that even the most heavily funded committees could not escape the gravitational pull of total administrative chaos. While the cage fights on the executive lawns drew shocked gasps from traditionalists, a different kind of disaster was brewing down the avenue where the highly publicized Freedom 250 concert was scheduled to take place as the weekend's primary musical attraction. Months of aggressive marketing had promised a star-studded lineup of legendary musical acts, drawing thousands of travelers who had purchased expensive travel arrangements specifically to hear their favorite artists perform beneath the shadow of the great stone monuments. However, just days before the first chords were set to ring out across the plaza, a massive wave of sudden cancellations struck the event, with 6 out of the 9 scheduled headliners abruptly dropping out of the festival due to undisclosed contractual disputes and severe logistical disagreements with the organizing committee. Left with a hollowed-out roster and an increasingly furious base of ticket holders, the organizers made the frantic, last-minute decision to cancel the concert entirely, replacing the musical showcase with a hastily arranged political rally that left thousands of music fans wandering the humid streets in search of alternative entertainment. It was against this backdrop of cancelled concerts and executive cage matches that the centerpiece of the entire multi-week celebration finally commenced on the grand expanses of the National Mall, bearing the grandiose title of the Great American State Fair. This 2-week-long extravaganza was heavily promoted as an all-American, deeply traditional and family-friendly affair, designed to bring the rustic charm and community spirit of rural agricultural fairs into the literal epicenter of modern federal power. Yet, from the very moment the temporary fencing went up around the iconic green lawns, a collective question began to echo across social media and throughout the crowded streets of the city, with citizens demanding to know why this event was happening, how much public funding had been poured into its creation, and what its ultimate purpose was supposed to be. Seeking answers to these mounting questions, prominent digital content creators Sam Schmir and Detterian arrived on the scene with their cameras rolling, determined to investigate the reality of the fair and peel back the glossy layers of official public relations to see what the experience was truly like for ordinary citizens. Even before they set foot on the fairgrounds, the atmosphere of deep irony and surreal confusion began to settle over their investigation, highlighted by Jones' choice of attire for the sweltering summer day, a sharp, distinctive tan suit that served as a subtle, deeply intentional nod to historical presidential fashion controversies that only true political junkies would immediately recognize. As they approached the security checkpoints, Jones and Schmir openly debated what this massive installation was actually trying to achieve, attempting to classify an event that seemed to lack any coherent cultural anchor or logical structural design. Jones openly wondered if they were walking into a traditional circus, a highly staged political rally, or a corporate promotional exhibition, before trailing off in deep thought and suggesting that the entire heavily guarded, hyper-nationalistic perimeter felt more like a highly controlled, authoritarian simulation of public joy than an authentic grassroots celebration of community history. The auditory landscape of the fairgrounds immediately confirmed their suspicions of algorithmic corporate curation, as the iconic female empowerment anthem by Shania Twain, "Man, I Feel Like a Woman," blasted from massive speaker towers for no discernible thematic reason. Echoing weirdly off the stone facades of nearby Smithsonian museums. As they navigated the labyrinth of paved walkways and temporary booths, they encountered a series of live musical acts that Jones humorously categorized as a generic, low-budget imitation of popular indie folk bands, providing a hollow acoustic soundtrack to an increasingly artificial consumer experience. What would a traditional American fair be without its staple culinary refreshments? Though here the prices had been inflated to astronomical levels that seemed to test the absolute limits of patriotism and consumer endurance. The investigative duo discovered that celebrating national heritage apparently required citizens to part with $17 for a single hot dog and cheese-stuffed foot-long pretzel roll, an exorbitant sum that raised eyebrows across the fairgrounds. For those seeking a sweet alternative, the vendors offered a $14 Nutella-stuffed pretzel foot-long roll, a price structure that prompted Jones to wryly comment that buying basic fair food in the capital had officially surpassed the record-breaking price of gasoline. A point reinforced by the staggering $5.20 price tag attached to a single bottle of plain drinking water. The visual design of the fairgrounds offered no relief from this sense of superficial simulation, as the pair walked past massive, elaborately painted walls designed to look three-dimensional from a distance, but which revealed themselves to be completely flat. Cheap pieces of cardboard upon closer inspection, perfectly mirroring the superficial execution of the entire festival. Hoping to find a genuine highlight amidst the commercialized monotony, Schmir and Jones decided to board the massive Ferris wheel that had been erected near the center of the mall, only to find themselves immediately trapped mid-air when the ride suffered a sudden mechanical malfunction, a breakdown that came with a surprising silver lining. Stranded hundreds of feet above the concrete paths, they looked down to catch an aerial view of the grand celebration, witnessing not a bustling ocean of millions of proud citizens, but rather a sparse, scattered gathering of merely tens of people wandering aimlessly through the massive exhibition spaces, a visual testament to the underwhelming public turnout. While suspended in the air, Jones also remarked on the social dynamics of their journey, noting that they had received an unusual number of intense, lingering stares from the other fairgoers and security staff, noting that their presence as critical. Observant independent media figures made them stand out dramatically in a crowd that was being heavily conditioned to blindly consume the corporate spectacle happening around them. After being rescued from their prolonged entrapment on the malfunctioning Ferris wheel, the investigative duo descended back onto the solid ground of the National Mall, determined to examine the core of what the organizers had proudly advertised as the crown jewel of the exhibition. According to the glossy promotional pamphlets distributed at every federal security checkpoint, the Great American State Fair featured over 150 separate educational exhibits meticulously curated from all 56 states and territories, promising a deep and immersive dive into the unique regional histories, cultural identities, and geographical marvels of the entire nation. Eager to experience this promised tapestry of diverse heritage, Detterian Jones and Sam Schmir guided their cameras towards the pavilion dedicated to the state of Kansas, anticipating a rich educational display filled with historical artifacts, regional agricultural achievements, or compelling stories of the prairie. Instead, what they encountered inside the stark canvas tent was a profoundly empty and uninspired presentation that perfectly encapsulated the overall systemic failure of the entire multi-week festival, offering little more than generic travel brochures and flat informational boards that could have been easily printed from a basic home computer. The sheer lack of effort, creativity, and substance in the display was so staggering that the two creators decided to call it a day right then and there, recognizing that it was completely impossible to top the unintentional comedy and sheer disappointment of the Kansas exhibit, prompting them to pack up their recording gear and conclude their physical exploration of the fairgrounds. The true significance of this bizarre summer saga, however, was not confined to the empty walkways of Washington, but rather found its true momentum when Schmir and Jones uploaded their unvarnished behind-the-scenes footage to the digital world, triggering an immediate and explosive reaction across global social media networks. Millions of internet users who had spent months watching highly polished, multi-million-dollar government promotional advertisements promising the grandest and most historic milestone celebration of the century were suddenly confronted with the raw, chaotic, and deeply underwhelming reality of what was actually happening on the ground. People online were absolutely screaming with laughter and disbelief as the video quickly mutated into a massive viral phenomenon, accumulating over 2.5 million views and commanding nearly 500,000 likes from a fascinated public within a matter of mere days. Comment sections across various platforms were instantly flooded with thousands of users shouting out their favorite moments from the video, turning Jones' deadpan reactions to $17 pretzel rolls and broken carnival rides into defining cultural memes that completely derailed the official public relations narrative of the historic Jubilee. Throughout the entire viral video, it was Jones who captured the overall consensus of a disappointed nation best, weaponizing a single, silent, deeply expressive look toward the camera lens that communicated more about the superficiality of the event than 1,000 analytical words ever could. This collective digital uproar exposed a profound and growing disconnect in modern culture between the engineered illusions created by elite organizational committees and the authentic lived experiences of ordinary citizens who simply wanted to honor a major historical milestone without being exploited by corporate vendors. When we step back and examine the wider context of this extraordinary summer, the identities and backgrounds of the primary participants offer a fascinating glimpse into how modern media shapes our collective understanding of major historical events. Independent digital journalists like Sam Schmir and Detterian Jones represent a new breed of cultural observers. Individuals who leverage the immediate power of decentralized smartphone video platforms to bypass traditional mainstream media filters and provide instant, unfiltered accountability to millions of viewers worldwide. Their previous body of work has consistently focused on demystifying hyper-inflated corporate events and examining the strange social dynamics of modern public spaces, making them uniquely qualified to dissect the bizarre administrative decisions that defined the historic summer of the capital city. On the opposite side of this cultural equation stood the faceless, heavily bureaucratic organizing committees and the commercial entertainment executives who had been granted unprecedented access to the nation's most sacred historic spaces. Historically, monumental anniversaries of this scale were managed by classical academic institutions, preservation societies, and civic leaders who prioritized historical education, architectural reverence, and dignified public assemblies that fostered a deep sense of shared national identity. In stark contrast, the logistical architects of this particular Jubilee chose to treat the historical heart of the capital as a blank commercial canvas, handing over the keys of the executive mansion's lawns to corporate sports promoters and pop culture coordinators who prioritized raw entertainment metrics over dignified historical commemoration. This fundamental shift in philosophy explains how a weekend intended for profound reflection on 2.5 centuries of societal evolution somehow devolved into a chaotic mixture of professional cage fighting, mass musical cancellations, flat cardboard walls, and extortionate food prices that alienated the very public it was meant to inspire. The long-term impact of these events will likely be studied by cultural historians and public relations experts for decades to come, serving as a cautionary tale of what happens when the solemn custody of national heritage is completely subordinate to the hyper-commercialized demands of modern influencer culture and corporate sponsorship. It forces a critical re-examination of how society values its own history, raising important questions about whether public spaces should be preserved as sacred landscapes for quiet contemplation or transformed into highly secure, monetized amusement zones for the highest corporate bidder. When the temporary security fences are finally dismantled, the steel stages torn down, and the patches of dead grass on the National Mall slowly begin to grow back, the enduring legacy of this historic milestone will not be the official speeches or the engineered spectacles, but rather the independent digital footage that captured the absurd reality of the event. So, as the dust finally settles on this surreal chapter of modern history, we are left with one final fascinating question to ponder regarding the true value of these grand public celebrations. Would you have willingly spent your hard-earned time and money to spend a chaotic, sweltering day experiencing the absolute madness of the Freedom 250 State Fair, or would you have preferred to watch the administrative collapse unfold from the safe, comfortable distance of your own digital screen? Be sure to let us know your honest thoughts and perspectives down in the comments section below as we continue to unpack the strange realities of the world we live in.